Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
Jays Nation, let me stop you right at the door, because if you think the future of the Toronto Blue Jays will be decided by one flashy headline, one viral name, or one blockbuster trade splashed across your timeline, then you're already staring in the wrong direction. Baseball history rarely shouts before it changes course. More often, it whispers. And this week, Toronto whispered something that sounded small, almost forgettable, yet quietly dangerous in how clever it might be. A 5'7" shortstop. Yes, 5'7". And that single detail alone tells you more about the Blue Jays' mindset than a dozen rumored megadeals ever could. Because the real question isn't who the Blue Jays signed. The real question is why they signed him now. Are they simply patching holes, throwing tape over cracks and hoping the ceiling doesn't collapse? Or are they carefully laying the groundwork for something far more ambitious? That's the thread we're pulling today. And before we pull it any further, do me a favor. If you enjoy thoughtful, honest Blue Jays coverage that respects your intelligence, hit the like button, share this with a fellow fan, and subscribe to the Blue Jays Report. This channel is about building a proper community, not chasing recycled hot takes, and every new subscriber strengthens that foundation. On the surface, the move barely registers. The Toronto Blue Jays signed former Phillies infielder Rafael Lantigua to a minor league deal with an invitation to spring training. Almost simultaneously, they brought back Eloy Jimenez on another minor league contract. Two transactions that, on their own, look like administrative footnotes, the kind you scroll past while waiting for the real news to drop. But baseball rarely operates in isolation. Moves talk to each other, and together, these two begin to sketch a pattern that feels far more intentional than accidental. Let's start with a name that barely moved the needle. Lantigua isn't a hyped prospect. He isn't the sort of player that generates shocked thumbnails or breathless commentary. His short, low profile, spent all of 2025 in the Phillies system, and never once wore the label of organizational priority. And yet, that's exactly where the intrigue lives. He's 27 years old. He plays second base, third base, shortstop, left field, and even designated hitter. He posted a .356 on-base percentage, drew 77 walks, stole 17 bases, and drove in 56 runs without relying on power. That isn't glamour. That's functionality. And right now, functionality might be Toronto's most undervalued need. Take a look at the middle infield depth chart without rose-tinted glasses. On the 40-man roster, the Blue Jays essentially have three names they truly trust in that space: Andres Gimenez, Ernie Clement, and Leo Jimenez. That's not depth. That's a tightrope. Yes, you can improvise. You can slide Addison Barger around. You can experiment with Davis Schneider. But improvisation wins games in April. It does not win divisions in September. Championship teams understand something painfully simple. The middle infield is where you stop bleeding. It's where small mistakes quietly become runs, and where tight games slip away if you aren't prepared. Lantigua doesn't scream solution. He whispers stability. He is insurance, but not the passive kind. He doesn't block prospects. He doesn't demand everyday at-bats. He doesn't arrive with ego or expectations. He simply fills gaps wherever they open, and that flexibility gives the front office something invaluable: freedom. Freedom to wait. Freedom to negotiate. Freedom to make a larger move without leaving the roster dangerously exposed the moment an injury strikes. Now flip the coin and look at Eloy Jimenez. 29 years old. Big frame. Long injury history. A player many fans have mentally written off. And yet, here's the detail that slipped quietly under the radar. He reportedly dropped around 20 pounds this off-season and spent the winter playing in the Dominican Winter League. That's not cosmetic. That's psychological. A player who accepts a minor league deal with a spring training invite isn't chasing comfort. He's chasing survival. He's betting on himself because no one else is anymore. Toronto has always been drawn to this type of gamble. It's low risk and potentially transformative. If it fails, it costs nothing. If it works, it changes the shape of the lineup overnight. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Neither of these signings solves the Blue Jays' biggest problem. They don't replace missing star power. They don't suddenly turn the offense into a juggernaut. What they do instead is buy time. And time, in this league, is currency. Because looming beneath these moves are the conversations nobody wants to face head-on. Joey Lo Perfido. Nathan Lukes. Outfield depth with no clear path to consistent playing time. You cannot stockpile capable players on the bench forever without creating internal noise. Eventually, phones ring. Eventually, other teams call. And when that moment comes, Toronto needs to answer quickly, decisively, and without tearing a hole in its own roster. You cannot trade an outfielder for an infielder and suddenly realize you've left yourself one injury away from chaos. This is where Lantigua becomes quietly essential. He doesn't complicate trades. He enables them. He allows Toronto to move a piece from strength without exposing weakness elsewhere. He acts as a cushion beneath risk, the sort of player who absorbs impact without breaking structure. That kind of role never trends on social media, but it shows up in the standings by July. There's another layer here that deserves attention. Late-game dynamics. Picture the 8th inning of a tight contest. One-run game. A walk. A stolen base. A rushed throw. A defensive mistake forced by pressure rather than power. That sequence rarely headlines a recap, but over a season, it wins you games. Toronto has leaned heavily into home-run-or-nothing baseball in recent years, and somewhere along the way, it lost its ability to suffocate opponents with constant annoyance. Lantigua is the opposite of passive. He stretches at-bats. He irritates pitchers. He turns routine innings into small tests of focus. That matters more than fans like to admit. Now combine that profile with an Eloy Jimenez fighting for relevance, and suddenly a theme emerges. Toronto is collecting players with something to prove. Players hungry enough to accept uncertainty. Players willing to grind for a role rather than demand one. That isn't coincidence. That's culture shaping. Let's pause for a moment of straight talk. Jays Nation. What does Toronto gain from these moves? Cheap depth. Defensive versatility. Real competition in spring training. Flexibility to trade without panic. And what do they lose? Nothing structural. No premium prospects. No heavy contracts. In other words, minimal risk with tangible upside. It's the kind of roster management that doesn't excite fans immediately, but it keeps seasons alive when things inevitably go wrong. And yet, one obstacle remains. If the middle infield is the biggest concern, it still isn't fully solved. Lantigua helps, but he isn't the final answer if injuries pile up or if the team wants to seriously push deep into October. Which brings us back to the central question, louder now than before. Is this the plan, or merely the first layer of it? I lean strongly toward the second. The Blue Jays are not behaving like a desperate organization. They are behaving like one that knows exactly what it still needs, but refuses to pay January prices for October ambition. Around the league, good teams reinforce depth early. Great teams turn that depth into leverage later. It's like building a deck of cards knowing not every card is meant to be played. Some exist to be traded at precisely the right moment. Of course, the community reaction has been split. Some fans dismiss Lantigua as irrelevant. Others argue this changes nothing. And that frustration is understandable. Fans crave immediacy. Analysts study structure. They look at calendars, workloads, and how teams respond when Plan A fails. Because seasons don't collapse when stars go down. They collapse when replacements aren't functional. Imagine this scenario. Toronto moves an outfielder for a more established infielder or a reliable reliever. The roster becomes balanced. The floor rises. And Lantigua quietly rotates in and out without destabilizing anything. He doesn't become famous. He becomes necessary. And necessity is the hidden backbone of winning baseball. So I'll leave you with this, Jays Nation. Do you want a team that makes one loud move and leaves itself exposed, or one that quietly builds depth and chooses its moment to strike? Because if this signing works, it won't feel dramatic. It will feel inevitable. And if it doesn't, Toronto walks away without consequence.